Welcome. Welcome to another episode of Everyman's Arsenal, a podcast dedicated to learning more about the influencers and the folks behind the brands that you see on the Thin Line Defense Co. channel. Today we got a special one for you. We have brand manager Jesse from Defense Mechanisms. Jesse,
Hey,
what's
how's it
going
going,
on, man? Thanks for taking time to be on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Oh, this was one that was a fun one for us. Walsh was like, "Oh, dude, Jesse is the one that I want to get on this podcast and just learn more about him and the folks at Defense Mechanism." So this is one we've been looking forward to for a while, and it kind of lines up with things that we're working on with you guys for the month of December.
Yeah, awesome.
So I had told Jesse a little bit about kind of the idea behind this podcast in an email that I sent to him, but basically, it's not always about guns and gear, but getting to know the people behind the companies and the products that we see on our channel that we review. So our viewers have seen you before. We did a SHOT Show video with you guys. We've shown your products off a ton on our channel, but I'd like to know a little bit more about you, Jesse, and kind of your background, and we'll probably lead into what got you started at Defense Mechanisms.
Yeah, man. So nothing special here. Obviously, grew up Midwest kid. Joined the Army right out of high school. Went infantry. That got me traveling a bit, right? Got me sent to Alaska, the way up north, and then obviously overseas for a bit. Yeah, got out of the Army a few years later, moved back to Illinois, and kind of, uh, obviously was into guns at this time, but nothing in the industry. I was actually more of an iron worker, right? I was doing a lot of welding and stuff like that. The company ended up, going under that I was working for, and I found a new job in Wisconsin. So that led me to moving a little bit more north. Once I got up there, they had just enacted concealed carry. So I kind of, I got my concealed carry license, which then led me into, starting to look for holsters and stuff like that. From that, I actually found a guy near me that was making, what at the time was new to the industry, Kydex holsters. They were kind of unheard of. You had like Bravo Concealment had just started up, some of John's stuff with Filster, but there wasn't a ton of people doing it. So I actually reached out to the guy to get a holster made. Through that, we ended up talking. I ended up taking over his company a little later on. He had another business. So I started making holsters in my spare time. And that just kind of took off for me, right? I actually started making more money with the holsters than I was at my actual day job. So it came to that point in life of like, man, I've got to make a transition here, right? So
Yeah.
Jumped into the holsters full time. Did that for a couple of years, but obviously, what we've seen is that industry exploded. And I just didn't have the ability starting off to scale with the industry. So I seen my place and kind of seen my way out of it, which, no hard feelings there. But what it had gotten me was a few contacts in the industry. So through that, I started working at Griffin Armament, suppressor manufacturer. They were near me, also some military guys. So we had that relationship. They had a training company that I had been, out to a couple of their classes in the past. So I started working there as their inside sales manager. And through this time, kind of like what you had here, I had, started firearms training. So like 2012, I, went to like a first time pistol class, basic, like just kind of concealed carry. But like that next step of like, obviously drawing from your holster, some accuracy standards, and kind of getting into that class, I thought like, oh, I'm going to go here. Like I was always the best shooter of my friends, right? I qualified expert in the military. So I thought like, I'm going to go to this class and like the instructor's going to be so impressed. By the time I leave here, he's going to be asking me if I want a job, So me and a buddy of mine showed up to this class, and yeah, what we quickly seen is like, oh damn, like you know, this pool's deeper than I thought it was. We weren't we weren't the worst shooters in the class, but just even the accuracy standards and like I couldn't 100% match those every time, you know. And it was like, oh, maybe I have some stuff to learn. And that kind
Yeah.
of got me bitten by the training bug, you know. So then it started to be like that's what I was doing, you know, once a month, something like that. I was getting out to a class. And through that, I wanted to document that journey kind of to the world, you know. So me and my buddy, we started a podcast. We started just having subject matter experts on the podcast, started going to these classes and kind of doing our thoughts on, you know, what the class was about, what we took away as, you know, just citizens now. And that really, like, you know, got me going into just training in general. So
Yeah.
through that, obviously, it was around 2018. I was helping Will Petty out at a class. I was one of his AIs for a vehicle CQB class. And in that class was a student, Tim Marshall. And Tim owned a backpacking brand called Enlightened Equipment. And we started talking, you know, kind of just gear. And, you know, obviously way back from my Army days, I'd always been kind of that gear queer, right? Always like
Yeah.
looking at the latest products and stuff like that. So we just started talking on gear and things like that. And he started telling me about how, you know, he was getting small government contracts for some of his backpacking equipment, you know, cold weather items and stuff like that. So I just started like giving him some ideas on like, hey, do you think we could make something like this or this? And that led to like, hey, man, what if we tried making a dedicated company, like a sub brand of the backpacking company, and started actually making these products dedicated for, you know, the law enforcement, military, and responsibly armed citizen. And that's kind of where the dream began. And I ended up leaving Griffin Armament, you know, early January of 2019, and started going full time here at DM, and the rest is kind of history there.
That's awesome, man. So I didn't know that Tim had a backpack, started off doing backpacks.
Yeah, so
And Tim,
Enlightened Equipment, it's like, you know, one of the top rated ultra lightweight, you know, it's like sleep systems, right? So
yeah.
quilts,
Okay.
things like that. And yeah, it's like highly rated on the, you know, PCT and all the different trails. It's the ultra lightweight backpackers.
Yeah.
Really enjoy the stuff. And, you know, that's what kind of drives a lot of the insulated apparel in DM.
Right. Well, I'm taking notes, just things that I wanted to touch on that you said, or things that were interesting to me. So, one of the things you said is when you went to training, like the pool was deeper than you initially thought. And I think, you know, those of us that have been in law enforcement or in the military, well, Walsh and I joke about like the training that you got in the military was that at least that we got in the military, some of the worst training that we got. And then in the law enforcement side, I see so many folks that they're totally okay with just the status quo. Like, what's the minimum I need to qualify? What's the minimum I need to pass? I did that. I'm done. Then you start going to these classes and you see, I love your quote here, responsibly armed citizens. You see these people that take this type of stuff seriously, and they're out shooting cops and military guys left and right.
Yeah.
Um, so I totally understand like the surprise and the wow factor going to a class and seeing that, because that was something that I experienced as well.
Yeah, you know, I think again, it really depends where you're at in your
Yeah.
journey, right? This whole thing is like a path, and it's like if you're just into guns and you go out every once in a while and shoot, right? Like to you, it's just an accuracy standard, right? So it's like
Yeah.
this is my range time. I'm pretty good at hitting the static target, doing this. It's when you start to add actual context and decision making into actual training that you see, like, oh, okay, like, yes, do I need to be accurate and need to know how to draw the gun and all of these things? 100%. But is that like the most important, you know, part of my training path is having that sub-second draw stroke? It's like, well, no,
Yeah.
maybe not. Like, you know, I need to understand how to move in and around people with this firearm. I need to learn how to de-escalate. I need to learn how to PID. I need to learn how. So then you just start to see like, oh, there's actual context to the things that we're learning. And then, you know, like that obviously drives that path so much further. It's like after your
Right.
first class, you realize like, oh, okay, this pool is deep, right? And then
Yeah.
after like your second or third class, you're like, oh, okay, like this is a river here. Like this goes on a bit. And then you get to the next class, you're like, okay, it's an ocean. Like there
Yeah.
is, and like all of this stuff takes constant maintenance. So it is again, it is definitely a path, not a destination class. And like
Yeah.
all of these things, like you have to perpetually get out there, see what's new, see what's, because again, that's how you collect a bunch of data on classes, and that's what then leads you to your deductive reasoning for
Right.
like life. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, I can leave those two little parts from that class, but the way he said this or this thing resonated with me and my job or what I'm doing. So
Right. No, and I love that thought process because that's something that even here at Thin Line Defense, Walsh and I don't agree on a lot of things. Actually, there's training. We just went to this night vision course, and there was things that we each got out of it differently. He decided he was going to put some new parts on his gun. He was going to test out at training. Ended up giving him failure drills. Like by the end of that, man, he probably had 10 times as many failure drills as anyone else. Very proficient on that side of it. Whereas I felt like I came away with a better understanding of how my IR laser works and things like that. I didn't have nearly as many failure drills under nods that he did, but it was because he thought, oh, I got to put this, I'm not going to name the brand, but I got to put this new fancy mag release on this gun without ever really trying it out before we actually went to the class.
no, and that's, I mean, especially on gear wise, right? Like everything works when like you have it set, it's on your timeline,
Yeah.
you're setting the accuracy standard, you're setting all the standards. Like, well, everything works in those conditions, right? It's when somebody else is setting the standard, you now have to just perform, and that's when you're starting to see like, does this piece of kit actually work in all of these conditions, right? Again, having some kind of context to it rather than just being out on the flat range.
That's that's interesting. So I'm curious then when you say like, if someone else is setting the standard, I guess thinking about it from a gear company, how does that thought process then lead you to into the designing of new gear? Like how does the needs of someone else help you or your company go down the path of designing a gear for that need?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing for DM, right, is that the end users are the engineers of the product. And that goes so much further, right? Like when the guy driving the car is also the engineer of the car, he's the guy who's the mechanic on the car, right? He's going to build that car a little bit different. And I think we've all, like, if you've been into gear at all for any amount of time, everyone's gotten a piece of kit and you're like, man, this thing is like almost perfect. But if they would have just done this or this, and it's because like the person who's building it doesn't actually wear it all the time, right? So they don't realize that having that buckle right there like rubs in, every time you're in a low carry kind of deal, or
Yeah.
to them, like maybe it's the manufacturing process. It's like, well, it's easier for us to sew it this way than this way. So that's kind of where this all began, right? It's like, well, it'd be so great if we just mixed this with this, and then got exactly what we wanted. So, for DM, like when it comes time to design products, it always starts with a problem. It's like, hey, this is the problem that we're facing. And a lot of that comes through the context of training or, having the job experience, things like that, where it's like, this is how we're carrying breaching tools now. This sucks. It would be great if I could carry it here. And like, that way it's not taking a guy out of the fight to be a breacher. Like we can have multiple tools on the team and still be assaulters as our main job, right? So when you set
Yeah.
that priority, now it's like, okay, well, how do we get there? What materials do we have? How would we like to see this thing carried? And that just like that starts in the R&D room. It's like, okay, we're building a sling. We need this sling. First thing that it has to do, it has to be able to stow on itself, right? Like, again, we're talking, and cops are getting in and out of cars. Like they have it in the middle of their cruiser. It's in the back of the trunk, whatever the case.
Yeah.
Like having that extra sling dangling around is not convenient, So I need it to stow nice and easy on the side of the gun. But obviously I need to be able to use full fire controls when doing it. And then I need it to be able to be deployed and put on, in just no time. So Like now we start going in with that, and it's like, okay, well, what size webbing do we want to use? Well, in my past experience using thick webbing, especially when it's necklace and I'm getting into high carry and stuff, like it's tending to block my vision. It's a big rub point on my neck. I'd rather have 1-inch webbing. And then it's like looking at webbing types. Well, what's a softer webbing? Is it 55-301 or 17-337? So now you start to just go down that rabbit hole. All right, well, now how do we make it stow on itself? And that's just kind of like where it all begins. Obviously, it starts with the problem set, and then it's trying to solve that problem set with the limitations of materials and the manufacturing process and everything else.
Right.
And what I'll say is, like, what I appreciate about us is we don't cut corners for like, it would be slightly cheaper. It'd save us 5 minutes of time. It's like, yeah, it's going to cost them an extra $5, but that feature is going to be worth it. Right. Like,
Right. But I'm curious then, like, who's bringing defense mechanisms these problems? Is this something that you guys think of, or you getting emails from folks saying, "Hey, can you do X, Y, and Z?" And then you take that to the drawing board, or is it internal? You guys are just talking amongst yourself. The sling idea. Hey, it'd be nice if we had a sling that did this. Let's design it.
yeah, I mean, all of them, right? Like,
Okay.
obviously, we're getting, guys from, specialty teams and different things like that. Like Sephardic, these guys want to, this product that's doing this thing. So then, like, they'll bring us kind of the problem, what needs to happen, what they're looking for out of the solution. And again, usually it helps us so much more if we can see that problem set, because,
Right.
not everybody is like a sewing expert or this expert. Like maybe this guy's an expert breacher, but that's it. He doesn't understand materials and all this other stuff. So it's then collaborating on that. Obviously, mentorship. We have the great benefit of having Joe Wire out at Alliance Police Training, which is one of the premier training facilities in the U.S. We get to spend oodles and oodles of time out there to then, see the problems that their SRT teams, but not only theirs, but all the other departments that are coming and using this facility, all the other, military groups are coming using this facility. And then we get to start seeing the problem sets that are consistent across the board, right? Like this is the job that they're doing. These are the tools and applications that they need for this. And then it's sitting down and like, okay, yeah, Joe Net is talking that, they need a new launcher bag, right? Like it
Yeah.
needs to have these capabilities for the launcher bag. Here's things that would be nice on it. And then, it's us testing it with them, getting it out to other agencies. It's like, hey, does this solve your problems as well?
Yeah, I love that thought process because that's something that I feel like I try to do even in my personal life as well, is understanding the problem. So I like this thought process or this idea of someone comes to you and says, instead of saying like we need a bag for our gas mask, and you guys then just go, okay, well here's something that holds your gas mask. Instead, the approach seems to be, okay, well, what gas mask are you using? Are you stowing it with or without the canister? Where do you want it on your body? And all of that better understanding of what the need is. Okay, now that we have a better understanding, we can go into the design process and start R&Ding this stuff, and then prototyping it. Okay, this is what we put together. Does this work for you? No, I want it to do X, Y, and Z. Okay, back to the drawing board. So that idea is something that I really enjoy in my life when dealing with problems at work. Someone comes to me with a problem. Okay, well, when you say this, do you mean this, or do you want me to do X, Y, and Z? So it's cool to see that being implemented in the gear business world as well.
Yeah, again, just trying to solve the problems that are out there, right? And trying to make things modular. Obviously, what works really well for me, might only work 70% for you. So having the ability to just, change some things up while keeping the same design criteria, like obviously that's going to be beneficial. So what you'll consistently see across our product line is, modularity, durability, right? Quality. Like these are things that are just our staple core goals that every product's got to have. Like, could we build every product under the sun? Well, of course, but like probably on some of this stuff, it's like, well, this company is already doing a great job. Like all we would do is rip off their thing. Like we're not that company, right?
Yeah.
Instead, it's like, yeah, we're taking things that don't exist or problems that are there with gear and changing them to what we feel is the best solution at this time.
Yeah.
And like, obviously what you'll also see across our product line is we don't always get it right 100% on the first go, right? Like there's V1, V2, V3s. It's because again, it gets out there and it's doing 90%, but a guy comes up and he's like, hey man, I noticed this. And if this little part changed, it would be better. And we're like, ah, fuck, he's right. Like we have to change that now.
Yeah.
So it's a constant evolution. It's having your finger on the pulse of, yeah, what is the problems? What is the current state of technology? And, what is the job that is needing to be done? Because it's always changing.
Right. So how much input would you say you get from, these, to coin a phrase from you, these responsibly armed citizens and not the law enforcement military side of the house?
Yeah. I mean, probably more, right? Because, like, again, as you've seen going out to some of these classes, and like you've said, in the past, it's like, as for most cops, like, and military guys, especially if they're not like the SRT member, or they're just the standard patrol, like the standard infantryman, like they're just getting the equipment that's issued to them. They already have a problem like being able to add extra stuff to it without getting yelled at, right? And most of the time they just don't want to spend like their own money on it. Now obviously
Yeah.
that changes as you get into more of like your select roles and stuff like that. But as far as like citizens, like this is their hobby. This is what they do, right? This is what they're spending their weekend time and stuff on. So we get tons of feedback from responsibly armed citizens on good ideas, like guys that are out there living in their kit, training in it, right? And doing
Yeah.
all this stuff, but yeah, just don't have a full-time job where it's required.
Yeah, and that's interesting because it ties into something I'm pretty sure Walsh had shared this with me, but I don't know how many folks know that Defense Mechanisms has a training arm, and off the top of my head I can't remember the name of it. Can you help me out?
Defensive elements.
Defensive Elements. So, how many of the folks that are going through classes that you guys have are these responsibly armed citizens, not law enforcement, not military?
Yeah, I
A
mean,
majority?
usually it's 60% of the class is just
Oh, that's
responsibly
awesome.
armed citizens, where the rest are, yeah, military, former military, current military, or obviously LEO.
Yeah. And what would you say would, talking to these folks, um, outside of the gear world, what are some of the things uh, that you're trying to, I guess, pass along to them from your background, like knowing your background, being in the military, working alongside law enforcement a lot. How does that background, I guess, that you have go into the training side of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think for most of these people, it starts with a realization of like, hey, I want to be safe. I want to have tangible skills with these firearms, right? So usually it starts with a flat range class. Uh, People get a firearm. They're like, hey, I realize that I don't know much about this. I want to go to somebody to show me, how to manipulate it, how to be accurate with it, how to be safe with it. And then from there, right, as you're talking in these classes, you're starting to pass on other education of things of, again, giving context, right? And they're like, oh, so there's more to this. Um, and I've been on that path, right? And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit here, jujitsu, but it's like that white belt mentality, right? You get there and you're like, oh, okay, like this now goes on. Well, over time, like, these people, they start to see that it's challenging, it's fun to like come in a group of like-minded people to learn skills that are actually have tangible nature to them, right? Like to have that feeling of that, you could protect your family or loved ones. And then you see that like these things also take maintenance, right? It's not like, like all cops are a perfect example of this, right? Like you took the DUI evaluation test once in your career, and now 10 years later that certification is still good.
Yeah.
Like you took your taser test one time, and yeah, now it's still good. Well, when it comes to like training, and like it's a perpetual thing. Like you have to continuously keep maintenance. If you do one CQB class and then don't do a CQB class for 5 years, you're not going to jump back into that class and be as good as you were like day 3 of that class 5 years ago. So
Right.
I think as people get into this, they start to see like, oh, this is a deep pool. Like this continues to need that maintenance. And yeah, they just stick with it. And I've thought about this a lot of like what sets those people apart, because I've seen every facet, right? I've seen guys that come, they take one class and they're done forever. I've seen guys that come, they get hard into it for like a year and then they kind of fall off. And then I see guys that, they've been in 12 years and they're still hitting every class with us. I don't know what like drives those people. I think,
Yeah.
it's the same thing as jujitsu, right? Like some of it is just the challenge of learning, understanding, like it's hard, wanting to actually like be the best at things, and obviously bankroll time, like all of that
Right.
plays into a factor as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I jotted down based on what you're saying, like perishable skills, all these things. If you don't use them, you don't train them, they're gonna go away. You touched on. I wrote it down too, like tangible skills and jujitsu. Like jujitsu is a very hands on martial art. I mean, all martial arts are very hands on, but jujitsu seems like more so in the grappling world. What got you into the jujitsu world?
Training, right? So training with people like Craig Douglas, Cecil Birch, Paul Sharp, like the ShivWorks crew, right? Started to show me that like not every problem's a gun problem, right? So your first classes, like everything's kind of gun centric, right? You're doing, like the manipulation, the accuracy. Well, then I started taking like thinking classes, environment classes, where now all of a sudden, like I didn't have a designated safe direction kind of deal, right? Like I had to start making decisions with a gun in my hand. And through that, right, like you start to realize, like, oh, like there's going to be times where like I don't actually shoot the target, like they're no longer a threat. And now I've got to do this. And like, then you start to realize, like, well, sometimes I'm at a range or a distance where like getting this gun into play is actually going to be difficult, or problematic for me, in fact. So now you like start to get into that close entangled fighting with a firearm, and what it quickly showed me is like, holy shit, man, I need some basic grappling skills, right? Like a month of jujitsu class just to teach you, again, how to escape simple positions, how to frame, how to do these things. I'm like, I've got to go get into it. And, again, the benefit for me is I had so many mentors in this that were already doing it. My good friend Jeff Bluevman at the time was a purple belt. So I had Cecil and all these guys to be able to like, hey, is this a good gym? Is this? And that got me to show up to the jujitsu gym, right? And just like day one of firearms training, like what an intimidating feeling, right? Like
Yeah.
here you're walking in, and you're like, I don't know, like I didn't really wrestle. I had some GFT from the army, right? Like some combatives
Yeah.
from the army, but like that was my experience coming into this. And it's just one of those humbling things, right? You go in and like you're about to get your ass kicked for the entirety of the class, right? But again, it's slow progression. It's like as long as you just keep showing up, you keep putting in the work on those tangible skills, eventually you get much better at it. So like, yeah, I think that's what got me there was the firearms training in general. It led me to be like, oh, not everything's a gun problem. Like I also am going to need some de-escalation skills, right? I'm also going to need less than lethal skills. I'm
Yeah.
also going to need some combative skills. So again, it just showed me how much deeper that branch off of just firearms training goes.
Yeah, and it seems, I mean, maybe it's just in the world that we live in, everyone has a cell phone, so you're seeing this a lot more, but there seems to be more and more instances of civilians um, de-escalating or completely stopping a problem using jujitsu skills, like choking someone out, getting them in a arm bar or something, holding them down, being able to hold them down until cops show up. So with that in mind, I see the importance of jiu-jitsu. I enjoy it. My son enjoys it. They even have like women's class that my daughter and my wife go to sometimes. But what would you say would be your argument for folks to start looking for a gym and start going to jiu-jitsu classes regularly?
Yeah, I mean, it's jujitsu becomes like veganism or CrossFit. Like once you're in it, like obviously you're trying to preach it to everybody,
Yeah.
because it changes your life in so many ways. I think it is so good for people. Obviously, there's the physical element of this, right? And getting in and just grappling and putting hands on people and being pushed around and like being under pressure, like all of that gives you that activity level of like going to the gym. And for sure, right? Like your first time rolling, I don't care if you're a marathon runner, like you don't have the cardio for it,
You are
right? It's like it's
you're
just a
sucking
different
wind, man.
animal. So and then obviously, like, yeah, problem solving under pressure. I think what jujitsu does best is it shows you like your limitations. Like I think
Oh, I
of how
like
many
that.
times you've been in like an almost submission, right? And like in the beginning, you're like, oh my God, somebody like sits on your chest with pressure, like setting up a mounted triangle, right? And you're like, tap, 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 like I can't even breathe. They're just crushing me. And then
Yeah.
later on, like you're like, oh no, like you're gonna have to kill me. You're going to have to put me down for me to like go. And it's just like, because you've put yourself there so many times, like what your limits are, and again, like there's a huge benefit to being able to make good, fast decisions under pressure. Your body, like it doesn't know the difference in stress, right? It just knows stress. So the more you can put yourself in stress and like, control that stress, benefits huge. So as like I now go to firearms training, I'm making these decisions. Well, I have that little bit of experience from jujitsu, from being under pressure, that then it just helps me remain calm. Like, think of how much more confident you are walking into so many different situations now. I
Yeah.
remember like my first force on force class being terrified, of like, oh my God, like they're going to shoot me with UTM rounds. I'm going to feel it. Like I might have to go hands on with somebody, da, da, da. And now it's like, yeah, that's Tuesday. You know what I mean? It's like I do that every single day in the gym. It doesn't even matter. Like there's not even a thought of having to go hands on. Like you remember back to your like white belt days of getting into jujitsu and you're like looking around the gym and you're trying to like plan your rolls out, right? You're like, okay, I know I'm like a little better than that guy over there. And like, oh, that guy's really hard. I'm going to try to avoid him, but like as that path progresses, it's like you're looking for that challenge, right? Like you're trying to get with the hardest people, the people that are going to push you further.
Yeah.
And I think, like, again, is jujitsu for everybody? No, man, it is definitely not. Like, I think everyone should give it a try. But I understand it is like it's a hard sport. Obviously, like it's a contact sport. There's small injuries, especially in the beginning. Like you're spazzy, you're trying to over muscle stuff. You just don't have the technique, right? So you're injuring yourself. You're sore. This hurts. You pop a rib, like whatever the case. And it takes like a certain kind of person that enjoys like that little bit of misery, right?
Yeah.
That enjoys that showing up to the gym and like knowing that you're about to put in that hard work and like you might, be a little sore leaving, or you're definitely going to be sweaty and tired. And, but
Yeah.
again, that person makes you stronger. Like,
That's true. And the other thing for me that I noticed with jiu-jitsu, the confidence boost. I'm a I feel like I'm a pretty big guy. I'm 6 foot, probably 215, 220 pounds. I remember a brand new white. I'd probably been doing it for maybe three to 4 months at this point, but a brand new guy came in first day. He had wrestling in college, and he was much bigger than me, and you could just when like someone grabs you, you could just feel like their physical strength. And I remember thinking like, oh man, this is gonna be a rough day of rolling. But again, like going back to the things that I was taught, being able to escape things, I think surprised him because he was thinking like, I'm this big muscly guy, I'm gonna be able to muscle through this. How is this guy getting out of this and getting on top of me? So it was a huge confidence boost. It was funny too. My son, I forgot what the move is called, but he was at a competition and he did this. He like interlocked his legs with the kid he was competing with, and he did this roll, and he was able to move the other guy and get the kids back and get him in a rear naked choke. And he was kind of at this point, he was thinking like, I don't know if I want to do jujitsu anymore. I don't know if it's for me. There's this there's this girl that he likes, and I was showing the video of him doing this move to someone else, and she's like, "Oh, is that your son?" I showed her the video, and she was like, "That's pretty cool." And then I told my son that I was like, "Hey, so and so saw the video of you doing this role, and she thought it was pretty cool." And he was like, that like, heck yeah, jujitsu is my thing, man. I'm gonna
right.
keep going. And the
Dig it.
confidence boost for him, every time he's competed, he's podiumed. He hasn't got
Yeah.
gold yet, but dude, like 4 weeks after he started jujitsu, he did his first competition, walked away with the bronze. So he loves it. Huge confidence boost for him. Um, And that's something that I saw in my training as well.
Well, again, like humility, right? Like
Yeah.
it goes both ways. Like how much more or less likely are you to like just start shit with a random person? Like a, you're getting aggression out on a day-to-day basis, like therapy, right? But then also like, yeah, it's like I know dudes that are 135 pounds that would put the stomping on a dude who's like 220, right? Because they just have technique, they have training, So it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, it quickly shows you like the world ain't how you think it is, and it's better to kind of just stay in your lane rather than like all the times like I see red, like I'll just do it. It's
Right.
like, yeah, when's the last time you actually got into conflict? Like I get you were a high school wrestler, but now you're 42 years old and haven't been in an altercation since. Like you're not just going to rise to the occasion that day.
Yeah. Well, and again, going back to what we were saying before, with all these skills that we've been talking about today, they're perishable skills. If you're not exercising those muscles, you're not training, you're going to lose that. I mean, it's something that we all see. You get away from doing something for a long time, and you lose that skill. An example for me, in the military, we have M4s. My first law enforcement job, we didn't have our long guns were MP5s. We didn't have M4s. So I spent 8 years where my rifle was a pistol caliber. So I get to this new job and we have M4s again. And it's been but you look back and it's been 12 years since I had training with an M4. So I'm asking our firearms instructors like, "Hey, I'd really love some help maneuvering, and it's not something that I'm used to anymore." Um, but it doesn't seem like there's a big emphasis there. And so that leads me, because it's something that I want to be proficient at, I got to go find training elsewhere. But it's because I want to stay proficient at that.
Yeah, it's important to you. And like again, this is the part of being a responsibly armed, citizen is that responsibility is on you. Like again,
Yeah.
I think everyone should have the right to own firearms, right? But then I also think it's on you to be responsible with that. Get the education, make sure that you have the tangible skills. Like if you're more of a liability with the firearm, that's the problem. And I think that's what the firearms industry in general, right? Like we have the firearms industry and then we have the training community. And that's a big difference there, right? The firearms industry, well, like it's branched off in all of these different sections. And I think once you get into the actual training community, that's where you see like the actual responsibility, right? And the difference is just education. The firearms industry, education's all over the place. Well, this is the best gun, this is the best gun, this is and it has no context or no background. Once you actually get into the training community, now all of a sudden like the education's coming from a place of context. You can put it against other data, and that's what really starts to shine through. So everything just comes down to education. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's your responsibility as a responsibly armed citizen to find that information. And the beauty of today and like the internet is it's abundant. Like it sucks because everybody gets a voice, but what you'll see is the further you start to go, you'll start seeing the same names and things popping up. And like once you can then trend data, it's like, okay, well, if 200 people are saying this is a fucking good class to go to, it's probably a good class to go to.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like, excuse me, I like the words that you use in the firearms industry and training community, because that's what I've noticed going to these training classes, this community mindset where very rarely do I find someone that it comes across as a know-it-all. Instead, I find a lot more folks that are, hey, here's my experiences. This is what's worked for me. So I'm going to show you this. And then we'll walk through, individual issues that you might have. And maybe I have some knowledge or skill that I can help you with this thing. But it's all about helping the person, pulling them up to a level that they may not be at, instead of putting them down or telling them that they're wrong for thinking a certain way or wanting a certain thing. Um, that night vision course that we went to, I don't think anyone had a night vision setup that was the same. I mean, there probably a vast majority of the optics there were EOTechs, but different barrel lengths, different hand guards, everything else was different paint jobs. It doesn't matter. And the instructors didn't look at that like, oh, this guy's going to be stellar because he's got a Mark 18. It was, nope, everyone's on equal footing here, and this is you're here to learn, and I'm here to teach you.
Yeah.
I
I
love
mean,
that mentality.
yeah, basically, our whole thing, what took me 12 years and thousands of hours in training classes, I've now been able to cut down students. Like, I can get you there in a year. You know what I mean? And it's because, like, obviously, as time and experience and everything goes on, and again, it just relates back to jujitsu, right? Like, think white belt versus black belt. Well, that black belt, like, it isn't the end of the path. It's not like I made it and it's like, well, guys, you'll never see me at the gym
Yeah,
again. Like, I've got the top end of the belt. It's like, no, now it's that more instructor role, right? Like, how do I get you up to the level that I'm at and not have to take as much time to get there? Here's the things that, man, light bulb moments for me when I was in your shoes, and like, this is how we progress the industry. Like, obviously, I can take a dude in a class that, like, and make him shoot way better than what if I was in his shoes back then, right? Like, I just couldn't get there in that amount of time. And it's,
yeah,
obviously technology, teaching techniques, all of these different things that have helped, smooth that path out tremendously for what is the future. And, like, again, it goes back to education. Like, the more we can get out there, before you were reading this in Gunsight magazine or, like, like stuff
yeah,
like that. Now, the world is kind of your oyster. So, I'm seeing it in classes. The problems that students were having 5 years ago, 6 years ago, just aren't even things that are brought up anymore. And some of that's technology, right? Like, lights is a perfect example. Well, flashlight technology wasn't as good 5, 10 years ago, so things like PIDing was problematic for students, especially
yeah,
in big open places. Well, now with, like, cloud rains and stuff like that, right? That problem's been taken care of. Like, so now we're seeing different problem sets that are starting to come in. And then we address, like, okay, how can we teach this better? How can we do this better to then make sure, like, students are getting that from day one rather than day 300 in the class. And it's
yeah.
like, if you build that program from the beginning, it's crazy to see, like, how much better prepared students are.
Yeah, a lot of lessons learned over the years. Instructors were teaching one thing, and then something happened. They're like, "Oh, that maybe that wasn't the best way to teach that." One of the things that I remember teaching or learning when I went to school, our guns used to have decock levers, and so they used to train at the firing range, 2 rounds at the command of fire, 2 rounds, decock, holster, and then they watched a video of a guy, off-duty cop. It was a bank robbery, 3 guys, and he squared off on one dude, drew 2 shots on that guy, decocked holster, squared off on the second guy, drew 2 shots, decocked holstered, and they were watching this afterwards, and they were like, "Oh, this is okay. Why don't we do however many shots, scan for additional threats? That's a much better training method than just hammering in. Everyone's going to learn it the same way."
Yeah.
So I I love that. I mean, as usually some of these training scars come about, the death of an officer or a military member, and folks learn from that. Hopefully, it's not that case. Hopefully, it's just folks out at the range thinking or learning, oh, this thing that I've been taught isn't the best, and here's a different way to do it. So, with that in mind, what would you say for defensive elements is your guys's goal pushing forward into 2024 and beyond that on the training side? Are you pushing for more law enforcement interaction? Are you pushing for more of these responsibly armed citizens? What's your goal there?
Yeah, man, just, spreading the gospel. Obviously, we've already got a couple classes on the books for 2024. Um, and, I mean, big goals for us right now. We don't have a home base for defensive elements. So, it would be nice if we could get into either a local range here or get our own facility set up. So that way, now we have a home base, and it would make it much easier on us to be able to teach out of a location close to, the shop here.
Right.
Currently, what we're doing is like, we're renting facilities in Indiana, Ohio, things like that, so that we can teach these classes. We have other, like, ranges, Illinois, places like that, that we'll go down and we'll teach, the flat range classes and stuff like that. So right now it's really like a traveling instruction.
Yeah.
Whereas, goals for the future would to make that a home base location and then do a couple of traveling classes. Again, selfishly, what that would also allow us to do is then host, right?
Yeah.
So, me and Tim are spending about 1,000 hours training a year. Well, that's a fucking part-time job in of itself. And it requires us, like traveling to all these places to take the classes and stuff like that. So if we had that home base, well, now all of a sudden we could bring those instructors here, and yeah, again, the selfishness of this is after you've been to all these facilities, you start imagining in your head what your facility would look like, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh man, it'd be so nice if, during a hostage rescue class, you actually had a speaker system that could make the crisis site more, and it's like we could easily do that with Bluetooth speakers, and like we could do this with that. So
Yeah.
you start, daydreaming on the way to all of these training events of what your facility starts to look like. And yeah, we'd love to get that. Obviously, our main goal for defensive elements has always been just getting information to people that want it. None of us really wanted to be firearms instructors. It was actually our mentors that were like, hey, we're not going to do this forever. Like,
Right.
eventually this torch has to be passed on. If not you, then who? And that always stuck with us. Obviously it is not the business you get in to make money, right? You
Right.
want to lose money fast, like yeah, start a firearms training business, because it's for the love of the game, definitely not for paying your bills. But that's the beauty, right? With in the
Sure.
position that we have, DM is what pays the bills for us, and defensive elements is just all about getting good information to people that want to get it.
So then, as a on the individual level, then what's next? What's next for Jesse with defense mechanisms?
Man, yeah, obviously, having my hand in everything. So got a ton of big projects in for DM right now. You know, a lot that I just can't even, talk
Yeah,
about
yeah,
on
yeah, yeah.
here, but
I'm not
yeah,
asking for a
lots
peek
of big
behind the curtain.
projects. Obviously, we've been really hitting our department and agency order program. That's in full swing of making it again easy for guys that are doing the job to be able to showcase, get a discount on good gear, make it really easy for departments and agencies to purchase. Because what I've seen on this side is, it's not the patrol dude that gets to pick his vest most of the time. Like, he
Right.
has an input, right? But it's like the supervisor that hasn't worn a carrier in 10 years that's also looking at the budget and looking at how easy it is to order all the pieces. And, he's like,
Yeah.
well, it's just easier to go here rather than this will solve the problems on this dude's job. So, trying on the back end to make those very easy of like, hey, this is how you get into the agency program, right? Obviously doing standard mill and LEO discounts for individuals that are doing the job as well. And then like our T&E program, right, which is for agencies and departments to be able to, get some of the kit in, try it out for like 60 days and see if it's, fitting their mission needs. So been working hard on that. Through that, that's obviously led us to a bunch of trade show stuff. So I know for sure we'll be back at OTOA this year. We've got Soft Week. We'll be out at SHOT in a limited capacity again,
Yeah.
and things like that. So working hard on those fronts, obviously. R&D on a ton of big projects that we've got coming up that I think will kind of, for us, it went like plate carrier as a big project. And then you see like all the little supporting stuff and blah, blah, blah. We have, products coming out every month. And then like mech
Yeah.
belt was the next kind of big jump for us. And I think what's coming up here in the future will be that third just giant leap for us. And just, again, an area that has needed some stuff. There's like one or two main players in it, and if we can, put our finger into that as well, we'll be doing pretty good.
Awesome, man. I'm excited. All right. So as we wrap this up, where can people find more information on defense mechanisms or defensive elements? Where would they go?
Yeah, so defensemechanisms.com. Obviously, click on the training tab there. That'll get you to all the classes that we'll be attending as students, also all the classes that we will be teaching or helping out at. So definitely, go check out the training tab. Come join us at a class. Always a good time. Obviously, all of the social medias, you can find that on defensemechanisms.com. We've got the YouTubes, the Instagrams, the Facebooks, all down there at the bottom. Contact us if you guys got any questions. Just fill out the little thing and someone will reach back out to you.
Cool, man. Well, hey, I appreciate you taking some time hanging out with us and answering some questions. It's always fun for me to learn more about the person that I'm talking to instead of this conglomerate that might be, people think of as a company. Learning like, oh, these are actual real people behind the scenes. So I appreciate you taking some time and joining us.
No, absolutely. Appreciate you having me.
All right, guys, that's it for us. We'll catch you on the next episode.